My name is Leah Gooch, and I am an art teacher currently working in New York City. I've been in the city working as an art teacher for the last 7.5 years, and I've worked in both charter and I'm currently working in a public school. Art. I teach art because I love art. I find it to be a useful tool for a variety of reasons. For one, it is therapeutic for students to create art, and there's a visceral experience that happens when students are using different materials. They're able to explore something that they're not necessarily familiar with, and then tell a story about their own life using those materials. It gives the opportunity for students to solve problems. If offered a problem or a scenario by a teacher, they can then use these newly acquired skills to explain something, either an idea or an invention or some sort of thing. They can use those materials to show that thing, as opposed to using either a written or a verbal language. It is an ideal place for students to learn about other cultures. Visual art is a nonverbal form of communication, so they can learn about places all over the world. Finally, one of the most important things that I find most gratifying about teaching art is that it's a place for students to develop social and emotional intelligence. Recently I did this, was I asked the students about what's important in a city. When building a city, what is an important thing to have in that city? And students brainstormed creating a mind map using, as a class, different places and buildings, and based on what they saw in their own city and that they've seen on television. They then used markers to mark which buildings and which places would be most important for them to have in their city. The students were then grouped according to their choice and were given us a bunch of cardboard boxes and recycled materials and paper towel rolls and buttons and bottle caps and all sorts of recycled materials, and then use those to plan with their group as architects and design and then build that structure for those people. One of my most difficult classes was completely transformed. They were able to work together and problem solve. And while I did give them the conversational starters and the template to have the conversations about what to do when you disagree with somebody on their idea, they were so excited to have this, to work together and have this common goal, that it was worth solving the minor problems that arose in terms of the decisions about the structure. As an art teacher, I teach all the students in the school every week. So with a little under 500 students a week coming in, it could be difficult to ensure that I capture a snapshot of each of those students and their work and their progress and their success and their shortcomings and what they need to work on. And I found that using a Google Excel document tracker has been very helpful in quickly plugging in the shorthand numbers and phrases to remember where students are. With each project, students are given a worksheet that has short answer questions where they're required to reflect on both the process and their product of their work, so that it is given to me in a written form, and also as a class critique we share out with group members, and students share out with each other throughout the process of the project to provide an explanation about their work and also reflect on other students' work, who we call artists in the classroom, and discuss what they have seen and what they've noticed and how they would do something differently. Also, they discuss their problems that happened when they were working. This is also an exercise that helps prepare students for when they're at galleries and museums, which each class is always has the opportunity at least once to take a trip to a museum and see works in the flesh, which I think is crucial in order to have the students internalize what it is that we're making in this room and what it is that we're looking at when we look at art from around the world. Students misbehave because they need help. There's something that happened, or they're upset about something that had happened earlier, and they're asking for your help. And it can be very frustrating when you're delivering a lesson when a student disrupts the lesson to ask for that help. So depending on the situation and depending on the student, my reaction would be slightly different. However, in general, when I'm lecturing or there's a group activity and a student disrupts, I make eye contact with that student immediately and assess whether or not they're connected enough that they're not going to hurt themselves or somebody else. And if I do think that it's still safe where they are and what they're doing, then I try to look at the rest of the students and positively praise the students around them and encourage them to, and give them positive attention. If the student then changes their behavior and adjusts, I immediately positively praise that in a way of at least acknowledging that and pull them into the conversation, either using them or as an example in a story or a scenario in a very positive light, or ask them a question to engage them in the lesson, because it's also possible that they're just bored and the lesson isn't being pitched high enough for them to be interested. So if that's the case, then I hopefully engage them in the process. I always follow up later on with the student and explain and offer a listening ear to them to understand why they were disruptive, of course, and help them solve that problem, and then also explain why in a class with 27 other students it can be disrespectful to their peers and infringe on their learning, which is not fair. One thing that I found very helpful when a student misbehaves, if you have in your mind already options for what you're going to do if it escalates, each step that you respond, if you already know that you have 3 of these options ready if it escalates, you will probably as a teacher be slightly calmer. And very oftentimes students mirror a teacher's behavior. So if a teacher is physically showing anxiety or aggression, then the student will sense that and react accordingly. So being mindful of body language in that situation and inviting the students to join the class as opposed to feeling like you're putting them down is, I think, an important thing to remember. And it's really important to follow up with. I think I found that building the relationships with the students that are most disruptive has been the most rewarding part of teaching. Because oftentimes they see loopholes in either what you're saying or something that you've done or in the system or in the dynamic of the classroom, and they feel that they've been wronged. And by assuming the best every single time that a student misbehaves, it helps you to then figure out and get to the bottom of why they acted the way they did, which oftentimes, if you're interested in child psychology, then it will serve to inform you for your future, for future classes. How do I develop curriculum in a number of ways. I have a general template that I follow in terms of using different materials, and I set them up so that throughout the year we focus on usually the same or a similar, most of the classes are using the same materials, so that by the last 4 months of school, students are well versed in each of the materials and they can actually use different ones. And in one class, students can be using a variety of different materials, so that it can be self-service studio. so that the focus is more on the project and solving a problem and developing a piece that serves them and that they're not serving the material anymore. Of course, the state blueprints are incorporated into the lesson, and I use that as a guide in checking and to ensure that my lesson plans do address the benchmarks for each of the grades. I look up exhibits that are going on in museums in the area and also around the city to use the artists that the exhibits are showing to incorporate them into the lessons, because students will be seeing advertisements for those shows, and also hopefully it's going to be one of the museum trips that we take as a class. Also, those exhibitions are oftentimes, when I communicate with the education department in the museums, they already have content that is geared towards students or children, which is helpful when I'm building my lesson plans. With each lesson, I teach a new skill with the material. We learn about an artist, and by learning about an artist, we study their work, but more importantly, we think about the way that those artists think or thought based on where they lived and the time of that they were alive, because those were the factors that influenced them and the artists that influenced them. So I encourage students to think differently with each project, and with each project they are thinking like a different artist, in the hopes that they are encouraged to express a degree of empathy for other people. Finally, I ask students a question about themselves and about their own life, so that their project is actually comes from a force from within them, that they want to tell a story that happened to them, and they do so through the lens of another artist from a different culture, and from usually a different culture and different time period, and then incorporate that and exercise that new skill that is taught. So the spearhead is really their story, and it gives purpose to their project. Structure of my class day, usually I greet the students and establish the tone of the room in the hallway before they even enter the art studio. That's important because it sets the tone of what is expected once they enter the threshold, which is the door. So I greet students and give them a briefing on what I expect when they walk in the room and what they're expected to do as far as a thinking job when they go in, and a physical job. And check for understanding. I constantly check for understanding by judging their facial expressions, thumbs up, thumbs down, cold calling, asking students to repeat or to share with other students, to ensure that everybody in the class is engaged and aware of what's going on. So once they enter the room, they will see a huge sign that says respect. And in the beginning of the year, we to have a discussion about respecting 4 different things: respecting the teacher, respecting their peers, respecting the tools and material and the space, and respecting themselves. After that discussion in the beginning of the year, it's reiterated throughout the course of the year, and a visual reminder of respect is hung on the wall. That is the role of the art studio. Students are then invited to either complete a do now activity, which consists of either a writing or a sketching, or a quick conversation with a peer based on an image that's in front of them. But most of the time when students come in, there's an image on the board that ties into the lesson, and they're asked to consider what they see, notice, or wonder. They then have a few moments to think about it and internalize it. Then they share with a neighbor, turn and talk to a neighbor to share their ideas. That's followed by a group discussion for about a minute or 2. I then introduce the lesson and what the artists and what they're going to be doing, or following up with what they've already been practicing and what they've already been doing, to incorporate a new artist that relates to the lesson. Then the students share out again with each other to explain to somebody else what they're going to do once they go to their seats. They then get their supplies, they begin working, they work independently. I always try to make a short time, even if it's just 3 to 5 minutes, of really zero noise, so that the students have the opportunity to get into that zone and really focus. And oftentimes once that noise level is set and then it is alleviated, I find that a lot of students don't start talking because they're already involved in their project and really have little interest in engaging with anybody else at that moment. 3/4 of the way through the period, the students then are able to encourage to share with each other what they're doing, give each other feedback, have these discussions about what their project is. At that point, I'm circulating the room, listening in on these conversations to assess their success or where they need help. They then have a few more minutes to work on their project. They consider what they're going to do when they return the next class. There's a cleanup. We come back to the rug or into a circular, into a group space, reflect on 2 or maybe even 3 projects that have been worked on and that were successful, and hear from the artists about what they found to be difficult and how they worked through that. And then I give a brief explanation about what we're going to do the next class, and then they get online, do some breathing, and I say thank you and goodbye.